I used to think betrayal would come with noise. Shouting, broken glass, maybe a slammed door. But mine came quietly, hidden in something so small, so delicate, I almost missed it. It was a pair of silver earrings, lying beneath our bed, catching the morning light. They weren't mine, and somehow I already knew what that meant. My heart sank before I could even ask the question, because deep down, I wasn't just looking at a pair of earrings. I was looking at the end of the person I thought I knew. The moment I held them in my hand, silence filled the room, the kind of silence that screams louder than any fight. That's when I realized. Sometimes the truth doesn't shout. It waits, quietly, right under your bed. Would you still believe your partner if the proof of betrayal was lying there, inches from where you slept? My name is Clara Mendoza. I used to think our home was peaceful, the kind of calm people envy from the outside. We lived in a quiet neighborhood where mornings smelled like brewed coffee and freshly cut grass, the kind of place where nothing truly bad ever happens. My husband, Daniel, worked as an architect. He was calm, patient, the kind of man who rarely raised his voice. We had a son, Noah, who loved climbing onto our bed every morning just to wake us up with laughter. I remember thinking, this is happiness. Not the loud, movie kind, but the gentle kind that makes you feel safe. We had a rhythm, Daniel and I. Morning coffee together, rushing to get Noah ready for preschool. Evenings filled with small talk and quiet dinners. Nothing extraordinary, nothing perfect, but it was ours. Sometimes I'd look at him across the table, tired from work but smiling at Noah's stories, and I'd think, we're doing okay. I never realized how fragile okay could be, how easily it could shatter with just one secret, one careless mistake, one forgotten earring under a bed. But back then, I didn't know that. Back then, I believed love was enough to keep us safe. And maybe that was my first mistake. When I decided to take on freelance work again, we agreed that we needed help at home. Daniel's schedule was unpredictable, and with Noah growing more active each day, I couldn't manage everything alone. That's when Lena came into our lives. She was 24, bright-eyed, and full of gentle energy. She had the kind of warmth that made children trust her instantly. Noah adored her from the very first day. I remember watching her play with him, her laughter echoing through the living room, her patience endless, as he showed her his little toy cars one by one. She called me Miss Clara, and always asked before touching anything in the kitchen. She was polite, respectful, and always wore that same soft perfume, the scent of something young and uncomplicated. When Daniel met her for the first time, he smiled and said, "You found a good one. She reminds me of my sister." I didn't think much of it. I wanted to believe we were simply lucky. Lucky to have found someone trustworthy, someone who made our lives easier. For a while, everything felt lighter. I could focus on my work again. Daniel seemed more relaxed, and the house was filled with the sound of Noah's laughter. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, I'd notice how Lena would linger a little longer than usual after Daniel came home, or how Daniel's eyes softened when she made Noah laugh. Small things, so small that they seemed meaningless. I brushed them off, telling myself I was just tired, overthinking, being one of those wives who see ghosts in every shadow. I didn't know then that the shadow I was ignoring would soon become the silence that swallowed our home. It started with the smallest things. Daniel began coming home a little later each week. At first, He said he was finishing a project, meeting clients, trying to secure a big deal. I believed him, because that's what love does. It believes, even when something feels wrong. Some nights, I'd wait for him with dinner ready, the candles burning low, Noah already asleep upstairs. But hours passed. The food went cold. When he finally came through the door, he'd smile, kiss my forehead, and say, "Long day." I tried to match his smile, pretending I didn't notice how his eyes looked distant, like he was somewhere else entirely. He started checking his phone more often. Sometimes he'd walk out to the patio to take calls, speaking softly, almost like his words weren't meant for me to hear. Once, I asked who it was. He laughed and said, "Just work, Clara. Don't worry so much." I told myself to stop asking questions, because every time I did, he seemed a little further away. One evening, as I walked past the living room, I saw Lena sitting on the floor, reading a picture book to Noah. Daniel was there too, sitting on the couch, watching them. He wasn't smiling at the story. He was smiling at her. It was quick, barely a second, but in that moment, something inside me tightened. It was the kind of feeling you can't explain, only recognize much later as the beginning of the end. Still, I said nothing, because silence is easier than confrontation, and sometimes silence is how we lie to ourselves. Some feelings arrive before the truth does. They come quietly, a shift in the air, a sudden heaviness in moments that used to feel light. I began to notice the small things first. The way Daniel would rush to shower as soon as he came home, or how he'd change his shirt before sitting at the dinner table. He used to greet Noah first, lift him up, spin him around. Now, he just smiled tiredly and said, "Daddy's exhausted." I told myself he was just stressed, that work was getting harder, that maybe I was overanalyzing again. But one night, something felt off. I had finished cleaning the kitchen when I heard laughter, light, carefree, coming from the living room. When I peeked in, Lena was standing near the window, holding Noah, and Daniel was beside her, helping the boy reach a toy on the curtain rod. Nothing looked wrong. Nothing was said. But when their hands brushed, it was the pause afterward that caught me. A tiny silence that felt too familiar, too careful. I remember smiling to break the moment, asking if they wanted coffee. They both said no, too quickly, at the same time. That's when my heart began keeping count, of glances, of excuses, of the way Daniel's tone softened when he spoke her name. Each night, when I lay beside him, I felt the distance, invisible but vast, like sharing a bed with a stranger who once knew how to love you. I didn't confront him. I didn't confront her, because denial is a strange kind of comfort. It lets you believe, for one more night, that everything is still the same. Distance doesn't always begin with space. Sometimes it starts with silence. Our dinners became quieter. The clinking of spoons, the hum of the refrigerator, those were the only sounds left between us. Daniel still asked about my work, about Noah's school, about the little things couples talk about every day. But the warmth in his voice, it was gone. He looked at me, but it felt like he was seeing someone else. One evening, he mentioned he had to travel for a short project. "Just a week," he said. I nodded, pretending to understand, even though I could feel my chest tighten with unspoken fear. Lena stayed longer those days, saying Noah needed help with his bedtime routine, that she didn't mind staying late. She was still kind, still soft-spoken, still the same girl who smiled whenever she saw my son. But something in me had shifted. I began watching them without meaning to. How Daniel's eyes followed her when she laughed, how his tone lightened when she entered the room. He used to speak to me like that. Once. One night, as I passed the hallway, I saw Daniel sitting alone on the couch, scrolling through his phone, a faint smile on his face. I asked what he was looking at. He turned off the screen too quickly. "Nothing important," he said. That moment stayed with me longer than it should have. It was the kind of hurt that doesn't wound the body, just the faith. At night, when I reached for his hand, he turned slightly, pretending to be asleep. That's when I realized love doesn't leave all at once. It fades in fragments, slipping quietly through the spaces we no longer fill. And once it's gone, no amount of pretending can bring it back. It happened on a Sunday morning, the kind of morning that feels soft and ordinary. The sunlight slipped through the curtains, painting faint lines across our bedroom floor. I was changing the sheets, humming absent-mindedly while Noah played in the hallway. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. As I lifted the blanket, something caught the light. A small shimmer near the edge of the bed frame. I thought it was a piece of foil at first, but when I picked it up, it wasn't foil. It was an earring, silver, simple, still warm from the morning sun. I held it in my hand for a long time, staring at it like it was a stranger I couldn't recognize. It wasn't mine. I don't wear silver. Daniel knew that. My heart didn't race. Not at first. It just sank, like a slow, heavy drop in my chest. I looked around the room, the unmade bed, Daniel's jacket on the chair, the faint scent of his cologne still hanging in the air. Everything looked normal. But that tiny earring felt like a scream in the silence. I tried to explain it to myself. Maybe it was Lena's. Maybe it fell when she was tidying up the room. Maybe there was a reason that didn't hurt. I wanted so badly to believe that, to believe something other than what my heart already knew. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, the earring still in my palm, and realizing how fragile trust truly is. One moment it's whole, invisible, effortless, certain. The next, it's lying in your hand, shining under the sunlight, reminding you that love can break without a sound. That night, I couldn't sleep. The earring lay on my bedside table, small and innocent, yet it felt heavier than anything I'd ever held. Daniel came home late again. His footsteps were soft, careful, the kind of careful that sounds like guilt. He paused when he saw the light still on. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, the earring resting in my palm. "Daniel," I said quietly, "do you know who this belongs to?" His eyes flickered, just for a second, but that second was enough. He took a deep breath, the kind people take when they're about to lie. "Maybe it's Lena's," he said softly. "She was cleaning last week, remember?" I nodded, but I didn't look away. "Did she clean under our bed?" I asked. Silence. He didn't answer right away, just rubbed the back of his neck, eyes fixed on the floor. The air between us thickened, filled with words neither of us could say. I could feel my heartbeat echoing in my ears, louder than the clock ticking on the wall. "Daniel," I whispered again, "if there's something I need to know, just tell me." He opened his mouth, closed it again, then finally, a sigh. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he said. The world didn't fall apart in that moment. It simply went quiet, like the sound had been pulled from the room, leaving only the truth, raw and unbearable, between us. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at the earring in my hand, realizing that it was never just about the object. It was about everything it represented, every unspoken distance, every moment I ignored my own intuition, every piece of trust I gave without question. And in that silence, I understood something I had been avoiding all along. Sometimes, betrayal doesn't destroy you in one blow. It breaks you slowly, one truth at a time. When the words finally left his mouth, the world didn't explode. It simply stopped moving. It wasn't supposed to happen, he said. Such simple words. Yet they split my life into two halves. Before and after. I sat there, still holding that small silver earring in my hand, feeling like I was holding the ghost of our marriage. He tried to explain. His voice cracked. His sentences stumbled into apologies and excuses that blurred together. I was lonely. You were busy. It didn't mean anything. Every word felt like a thread being pulled from the fabric of our life. I wanted to scream, to ask him how loneliness became a reason to betray someone who never stopped choosing him. But I didn't, because in that moment, anger felt too heavy. What I felt instead was something quieter, like standing in the middle of an empty house, realizing it used to be full of laughter. He reached for my hand, but I couldn't lift mine. The space between us was no longer air. It was something colder, thicker, impossible to cross. He said he wanted to fix it. He said he'd end it. But how do you fix something that shattered in silence? Something that broke while you were still trying to believe it was whole? I remember looking at him, his eyes wet, his voice trembling, and realizing that love can exist at the same time as betrayal. But it can never survive it. That night, I didn't sleep beside him. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing next to me, feeling like a stranger was in my bed. And in the darkness, one thought kept echoing in my head. The person who promised to protect me from pain had become the one who caused it. The night I left wasn't dramatic. There were no shouting matches, no slammed doors, no neighbors awakened by chaos. Just silence. The kind of silence that follows after everything's been said, and nothing matters anymore. Daniel had fallen asleep on the couch. The TV was still on, the blue light flickering across his face. For a moment, I just stood there, watching him, the man I once called home. He looked peaceful, as if guilt had found a way to rest before I did. Upstairs, Noah was asleep, his small hands curled around his stuffed bear, unaware that his world was about to change. I packed quietly, one small suitcase, enough clothes for both of us, and Noah's favorite blanket. Every zipper sound felt too loud, every creak of the floor like a confession. I paused at the bedroom door, my eyes scanning the room. The bed we once shared, the framed photo from our wedding, the faint smell of his cologne still clinging to the air. I thought about leaving a note, but what words could explain the kind of heartbreak that doesn't bleed? So I didn't write anything. I just turned off the lights, took one last look at the house that held both my joy and my undoing, and whispered goodbye, not to him, but to the woman I used to be, when I still believed love was enough. Outside, the night was quiet. The streetlights hummed softly, and the world didn't even notice I was leaving. I carried Noah in my arms, pressed him against my chest, and as I closed the door behind me, I realized something. Sometimes, strength doesn't look like fighting. It looks like walking away, even when your heart begs you to stay. The days after I left felt unreal. Mornings came, but they didn't feel like mornings. The light entered the small apartment I rented, but it didn't warm anything. The silence was heavy, not the peaceful kind I used to long for, but the kind that echoes in your chest, reminding you of what's missing. Noah asked about his father on the first night. "Is Daddy coming home too?" I smiled, even as my voice trembled. "Not for now, sweetheart." He nodded, in the way only a child can, accepting what they don't understand, trusting you'll make it all right. I told myself I had made the right choice. I told myself that leaving was strength, not weakness. But strength, I learned, doesn't feel strong. It feels like standing barefoot in the cold, holding your own heart together so it doesn't break again. Daniel called a few times. I didn't answer. He sent messages, long, pleading paragraphs about regret, about wanting to fix things, about how he couldn't sleep without Noah's laughter in the house. I read them all, and then I deleted them. Because sometimes healing means choosing silence even when forgiveness is knocking at your door. At night, I'd sit by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. There were moments I almost called him back, moments when loneliness disguised itself as love. But then, I'd hear Noah's soft breathing beside me, his little hand resting on my arm, and I'd remember why I left. Because I couldn't teach my son that love means staying when you're no longer respected. The days were hard. The nights were harder. But somewhere between the tears and the silence, a small truth began to bloom. I had lost a husband, but I had found myself. Months passed before I heard his voice again. I thought I had prepared myself for it, that hearing him would no longer hurt. But pain has a way of remembering its way home. One evening, my phone rang. His name appeared on the screen. I almost let it ring out. But something inside me whispered, "Answer it." His voice was softer than I remembered, tired, uncertain, carrying the weight of too many sleepless nights. "Clara," he said, "I just wanted you to know. She's gone." For a moment, I didn't understand. "Who?" "Lena," he said. "She left, moved back to her province. She said she couldn't live with what we did." There was no satisfaction in hearing it, no sense of justice or revenge. Just a quiet sadness, because what he lost wasn't just her. He lost the family he broke, trying to feel something new. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Every day I wake up, and the house feels empty. Noah's room, it's too quiet." I wanted to tell him that my nights were quiet too, that healing doesn't come easily, that some mornings still hurt more than I'd like to admit. But I didn't. Because sometimes, silence is the only language left between two people who have already said too much. "I hope you're both okay," he said. I could hear his breath trembling on the other end, like he was trying not to cry. I closed my eyes. "We're fine," I said softly. It wasn't anger that I felt. It was something quieter, the kind of peace that comes after you finally stop expecting answers. When the call ended, I stared at the phone for a long time. Not because I missed him, but because I realized how far I'd come, from begging for truth to living in peace without it. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Forgiveness isn't about letting them back in. It's about setting yourself free from the weight they left behind." Healing, I learned, isn't a straight line. It curves. It circles. Sometimes it even brings you right back to where you started, just to see if the pain still fits. Some days, it doesn't. Other days, it still does. Months passed, and I began to build a life that didn't revolve around what I'd lost. But grief has a way of visiting uninvited, often when everything feels calm. One afternoon, while buying groceries, I walked past a display of jewelry. Silver earrings, small, shining. For a moment, my chest tightened. It wasn't the object itself. It was the memory attached to it. The echo of that morning when sunlight hit the floor just right, and everything I believed about my life shattered quietly. I didn't cry. I didn't run. I simply stood there, looking at them the way you look at an old photograph. Familiar, distant, no longer dangerous, but still heavy. I realized that some memories don't fade. They just stop hurting the same way. Later that evening, as I tucked Noah into bed, he asked me if I was happy. I smiled. Yes, I said. It wasn't entirely true. But it wasn't a lie either. Because happiness, I've learned, isn't the absence of pain. It's learning how to carry it differently. Sometimes, I still dream of that house, of Daniel standing by the door, of sunlight spilling across the floor, of a small silver earring glinting beneath the bed. But when I wake, I no longer reach for the past. I reach for my son's laughter, for the soft light of morning, for the quiet strength that lives in me now. The memory still haunts me, yes, but now it whispers instead of screams. Time doesn't erase the past. It simply teaches you how to look at it differently. For a long time, I wondered why things had to fall apart, why love that once felt unbreakable could vanish in silence, why the person who once felt like home could become a stranger overnight. But one morning, as I was walking Noah to school, he picked a fallen flower from the sidewalk and said, "Mom, it's still pretty, even if it's not on the tree anymore." And somehow, that was the answer I'd been searching for. Some things lose their place, but not their meaning. Some endings are not punishments. They are protection. I began to see my story differently. It wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about awakening, about learning how to listen to my own silence, to trust my instincts, to choose peace over the illusion of perfection. I realized that betrayal doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, in small moments, in quiet neglect, in the spaces where love used to live. And forgiveness, it isn't about erasing what happened. It's about freeing yourself from what still holds you. I no longer hate Daniel. I don't wish him pain, because hating him would mean I'm still living inside the wound, and I'm done living there. The truth is, he gave me something I never expected, the chance to rebuild myself stronger, clearer, kinder. The lesson wasn't in losing him. It was in finding me. And maybe that's what life does. It breaks us open not to destroy us, but to make room for the person we're meant to become. 2 years later, I barely recognize the woman I used to be. The pain is still there, somewhere deep, but it no longer defines me. It has turned into something gentler, like a scar that no longer aches, only reminds you of how far you've come. Noah has grown taller. He laughs louder now, and sometimes I think his laughter is what pulled me back to life. We moved to a small town by the sea. Mornings smell like salt and coffee, and the ocean feels like forgiveness. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. I paint sunsets, quiet streets, sometimes even faceless figures standing by open doors. Maybe, in some way, I'm still painting the parts of me I lost. Daniel still sends cards on Noah's birthday. Short, polite. Nothing more. I no longer wait for them. I no longer wait for anything. There's freedom in that, in not expecting apologies, in not needing closure from the one who broke you. I've learned that peace isn't something you find in another person. It's something you grow inside yourself, quietly, patiently, until it feels like home. Some nights, I still think of the woman who found that earring under the bed, trembling, lost, afraid of her own truth. I wish I could tell her that she would survive it, that one day she would wake up, look in the mirror, and finally recognize her own strength. Because healing isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about remembering who you are beyond what was done to you. Sometimes, the truth doesn't arrive with thunder. It comes quietly, hidden in something small, something ordinary, like a silver earring glinting beneath your bed. We spend so much of our lives trying to hold on, to people, to promises, to versions of love that stopped existing long before we admit it. But maybe letting go is also a form of love. A love for yourself, for your peace, for the life that still waits beyond the hurt. I used to think my story was about betrayal. Now I see it was about awakening. Because pain, as cruel as it feels, has a strange way of bringing us home to ourselves. If you've ever found yourself staring at the pieces of a broken truth, wondering how to move on, I want you to know, you will. Slowly, gently, but you will. One day, you'll look back at the version of yourself who cried, who doubted, who stayed too long, and you'll whisper, you did your best. Because healing isn't about forgetting the betrayal, it's about remembering your worth. And if you've ever found proof of heartbreak lying right under your bed, maybe it wasn't meant to destroy you. Maybe it was meant to wake you up